absolutely love that. Like I said, I've never even thought about doing that. I might ask Mikey after the podcast why
I
Mikey's my friend.
really think you should. It's a really transformational kind of a thing, that people who are like, especially in this purpose exercise, people are like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what my purpose is. You often ask people and they tell you the description of their job as their purpose.
Yes,
and I'm like, man, you know that's not it.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to an episode of the Prime Life Project podcast. I'm your host, Daniel James, and I'm very excited again. I'm always excited when I have guests on because for those of you long-term listeners, if I don't have guests on, you get a double episode or double week of me talking. So it's always nice when I have a guest on, especially guests that are well-versed in the topic that we're going to be talking about. And again, the aim is always just to add some value to you guys. Now, my guest today is new to you. However, his wife is not. So my guest today is Dr. Paul Rivera, and he is a multifaceted professional with experience in academia, diplomacy. I knew I'd get the word. Do you know what? I knew I'd get that word wrong. I knew it was like diplomacy, international economics, and strategic coaching. He's a co-founder of Be Act Change and has mobilized nearly $1 billion for communities worldwide. That in and of itself is incredibly impressive. And again, I'm very, very blessed to have this gentleman on today. Dr. Rivera holds a PhD in economics from the University of South Carolina and is passionate about igniting positive change globally. Mr. Rivera, Dr. Rivera, how are we?
I could not be better. I'm so thrilled to be here. I can't even tell you how much of an honor it is. I want to take a moment as we get started to really acknowledge you, because I hope that you understand how much good you do in the world through this medium that you have here. And I mean that with a tremendous amount of sincerity. I'm Latin American. I come from that background, and to have a space where there are men who are talking about doing the work and positivity and bettering themselves and really defining a new concept of what masculinity is and positivity is huge. So I want to thank you, first of all, and I'm so glad to be part of that conversation. So I'm really, really glad to be here.
No, honestly, the pleasure of mine. I really appreciate those kind words. Even when I get it from the audience, I get text messaging stuff saying about the podcast. I still have to take a second to accept the compliment. Yeah. I'm still at that phase of my journey where although I put so much effort, time, and energy into the podcast, and I know that it does some good, when I get people actually reciprocate that and tell it me, it still takes a second to I've got to accept the compliment rather than try and divert it. So I accept the compliment and I say thank you. And it's really interesting because obviously when I was talking to your wife, Dr. Esther, it was fantastic that you were just sat there in the background. And afterwards, I was just like, any chance I can speak to your husband? He's like, he's actually been listening to the whole podcast, and then just how the conversation just naturally happened. It was brilliant because, like I said, it's been a bit cheeky to speak to you as well. And then the fact of you said that you'd enjoyed that podcast so much. So to now actually have you on as well to share your story, again, just an absolute honor. So first of all, I just want to sort of take my audience back, like I always do with my guests, because for me, I think it's really important to know where someone's come from to then talk about where they're at now. Now, as you mentioned, immigrant, moved over to America. Can you sort of take my audience back to sort of what that was like where you came from, what it was like moving to America, why your family moved, and sort of all the stuff in between, because I think that's going to be a fascinating story.
So here's my situation. So interestingly, in the United States, the immigrant experience applies to not just people who migrated, but people who were born into it. So I was actually born in the United States. My mom is from Mexico, my dad is from El Salvador. And so they came to the US separately, and they actually met in the United States, which is a really fascinating kind of a thing. And it's there's so many layers, there's so many things to unpack there. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, where it's a heavily Mexican community. So just the fact that my dad is Salvadoran and not Mexican put me in a sort of weird immigrant category, because I was never fully Mexican, I was never fully Salvadoran. And the immigrant experience in the United States is that you're never fully American either. Right? So you see a lot of kids, a lot of Latinos in the United States who feel very lost, who feel like they don't know where their home is, where their spiritual home is. Oftentimes they don't speak Spanish fluently necessarily. They speak English with an accent, and there's a lot of identity issues that circle around that immigrant experience. But that's so So you grow up in that, right? My parents came to the United States. They left everything that they had. You know, El Salvador was always a pretty turbulent country. And Mexico, where my grandparents came from, you know, they were in a situation of, you know, poverty pretty much, and they came to do the best that they could in the United States. And they risked everything. You know, they left their family, they left their belongings, they left their culture, they left their language behind. And so when that translates over to the American context, for us as the kids that inherit that, there's a tremendous pressure to succeed, right? There's a tremendous pressure to make good on their legacy. And at the same time, though, a tremendous pressure not really to take some of the bigger risks, right? That you need to play it safe. Like, we made a huge investment in you and us coming here. And so you cannot do anything too crazy. You have to sort of stay within that lane, right? And so when you think about things like the American dream, right? This idea that in this land of equal opportunity, all you need to do is work hard and you will succeed. Immigrants are some of the ones that have bought into that mentality the most, right? And there's data behind that, right? As they survey America, as they survey even other countries that receive a lot of immigrants, if you look at Australia, the UK, France, there's a tremendous notion among immigrant populations that's why they came, because they believe that it's a land of equal opportunity and that all they have to do is apply their energy and they're going to make it. Okay, so that's great. We know it's not true. You know, there's a lot more than hard work, and equal opportunity isn't really equal necessarily, right? So there's a lot of things that go into play there. But what comes out to the children of those generations is this idea of, one, the way that the American dream gets played out. So that the concept of it is lovely, but the way that it gets played out is that success that they're pushing you towards is something very specific. It's a specific set of check marks in a lot of ways, right? Your level of education, your marital status, and then a sort of attitude that goes with it, and one of really knowing your place. And that's something that I heard a lot growing up, and it took me a really long time to get past that. And so let me tell you, it's like this. That they would see somebody, especially a Latino, if they would see another Latino in, say, a fancy car, our own people will say, for sure, he's a drug dealer, or he's just showing off. It's somebody he must have gotten that by not earning it somehow, right? And so there's this sort of inherent disdain in a lot of ways for things like intellectualism, for things like luxury, for things like leisure, right? That you are a put your head down, work hard kind of a person, and that's the value that you bring, right? And so it makes for a really interesting thing. So one of the things that I talk about a lot when I do presentations and workshops and that sort of thing is the concept of fear, because I know that for many of us, the way that manifests, the result of that pressure to succeed and being sort of kept in a box in a lot of ways is a manifestation of fear. And so what comes out is this idea that you're afraid to make waves. You're afraid of judgment. You're afraid of conflict. You're afraid. And in my case, the big thing in my particular case was that I was afraid of failure. Fear of failure was a big thing for me. I was always sort of seen as the golden child, and I was sort of put on a pedestal. And that fear of failing is something that weighed on me so heavily, right? And it's just, and I know that it's a story that resonates with a lot of people as I talk to them. And it's, you know, I've had the luxury in my life of traveling to 112 different countries. So I've met a lot of people, and I make it my goal whenever I go, it's not just to see the sights, but it's to talk to the people. I love language and I love talking to people. And, you know, you see how much common human experience there is as you go to different places. And it's what I love the most. You know, I talk to the taxi drivers and the waiters, and anybody who will give me a second of their time,
Isn't it interesting with the taxi drivers? I always do the same. Like when I go to any country, when I went to Barbados, did the exact same thing. I was talking to them about your country. Like, tell me about it. Tell me something I wouldn't know. And they just love to talk about it. And you can really start to have a conversation. And then again, there's common experiences, because although I've not been through what he's been through, I can relate to it a little way. And then we have a conversation. And before you know it, you built that rapport. Same when we went to Ireland. Same sort of thing. We were having a conversation about Catholics and Protestants, having a really detailed conversation about it. And you're there like, wow, like this is the whole thing about it, that connection. Before we go down this path, by the way, I just want to just sort of loop back a little bit to your upbringing, because there's just two things I want to just clarify here with the audience. So the first thing is, if your parents are immigrants, but you are born in America, you yourself are classed as an immigrant. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Legally, obviously, you're an American citizen, but I would say that I've never felt like I have been treated as an American. So for example, I'm a former diplomat. So I have served overseas for the United States government, and really, truly, not until I went overseas and had other people perceive me as an American did I ever feel like I actually was American. So like within the United States itself, I've always understood that I'm brown, I'm different. I can't tell you how many times, I've had police officers pull me over because I look suspicious and I fit some sort of description. Or I've had people say to me, wow, your English is so good. How long have you been in this country? And I say, I was born here. That's happened to me dozens of times in my life. And not until we moved overseas, to Latin America or Asia or different places, did I understand what it felt like to be seen as an American. And it's very different from my normal experience.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because people talk about racism and they again, just calling you, I don't know, like some Spanish racial slur or something like that. But sometimes it's not even that, is it? It's the subtle things, like saying just the stuff like that of like, oh, English your first language, or little things like that. It's not the outright stuff you'd think, but actually saying that's very inherently racist. Or again, the police officers fitting some sort of description, and then again, just not quite feeling as you belong. That in and of itself is that feeling of that for me, because we talk about racism, it's like, oh yeah, racism is around. Yeah, I understand it's probably not as extreme as it used to be, like people outright saying stuff in the streets to your faces. But it's that subtle stuff that's still there that people don't actually realize. And then it's that belief system, which I want to touch on that. It's that identity and then that belief system that goes along with those two things, where it's sort of like you mentioned, where, again, fellow Latinos, they're kind of like, we're in this box, you can't leave this box. It's like, because they haven't necessarily put themselves in that box. It's all of the other nuances that have happened in their life that's kind of made them feel, oh, okay, we can't rock the boat. So it's almost like, correct me if I'm wrong, but would you say that it's more of a cultural thing that causes Latinos to stay in this sort of box that you mentioned here of like, don't make waves and all that sort of stuff? Or would you say it's an internal Latino thing?
My experience has been that, for one, it's not necessarily something that I would say is unique to Latinos. I have lots of friends that are Indian, that are Pakistani, that are, from China and lots of different places. And I think that it's something perhaps more common to the immigrant experience generally.
Yeah.
Like people come here people come to the United States or these other places for the same reasons, right? To really make a better life for themselves, for their children, to have more opportunity. And the way that manifests is a lot of that, right? It's a lot of that hard work, keep your head down, don't make too many waves kind of a thing. I don't think that it's something that is necessarily unique to the Latino experience. That's just how I've particularly lived it.
Yeah, so in the UK, again, we've got a lot of Indian Pakistani immigrants. I would say that's the main sort of demographic. But obviously, you're Latino, so I was only speaking to your experience. Obviously, we can't speak to however, you again have spoke to loads of different demographics. So the fact you're saying it's a common thing, that's really good to know. Like, it's an interesting concept. Now, I just want to link it back to what we were saying then about this fear, because I said the common experience as human beings, like we all have these common things, like these fears. And you mentioned a few there, like fear of failing, fear of judgment, fear of conflict. How does that sort of manifest itself then in people in terms of the life that they want to live? Because for me, I feel like a lot of people don't ever really try. And obviously, I know that you sort of mentioned that you were kind of encouraged not to try, but let's just take being an immigrant out of it. Let's just talk about people in general, just a blanket statement of people. I think a lot of people don't necessarily try because they're afraid of failure or afraid of conflict or judgment. Would you say that's a true all-around statement?
I would say so. I mean, so fear is interesting, right? That fear puts you in a particular mindset. You know, you adopt that fear mindset, and that becomes the basis for your decisions and therefore your actions. You know, so when you start with the fear idea, the most important thing becomes a kind of risk minimizing, or in a way, sort of reducing your own vulnerability, right? Because vulnerability is, by definition, vulnerability means your openness to harm or your openness to damage, right? And that's the reaction to fear in a lot of ways, right? So when people depart from a fear mindset, what they seek to do is to basically keep their wellness, their happiness within sort of these predefined boundaries. They want to minimize their vulnerability. They say, I'm going to take the actions that are going to keep me in this, what I deem to be a safe space. Okay. So you make those decisions and you take those actions, you devote your energy to them, which in a lot of ways is exhausting because there's no guarantee. And here's the kicker. There's no guarantee that those actions that you're taking out of fear are actually aligned with your inside, right? But here's what the fear does. You say that when you're departing from the fear mentality, you want to avoid something that you perceive as the bad outcome. You want to avoid the conflict. You want to avoid the judgment. You want to avoid the failure. Okay, so you take the safe route, and the outcome of that, most often you've applied your energy. You're a smart person. You worked hard. You've been told to work hard, right? So you get to this place, and there's an outcome, and sure enough, it didn't fail. Or sure enough, there was no conflict, or sure enough, there was no judgment. And you go, aha, okay, so it worked. And so this becomes sort of this self-reinforcing system, right? You said, okay, the fear mentality works, okay? But here's the problem. The problem is that outcome, you deemed it to be good enough. It was good enough because it avoided the bad outcome that you had in your mind, but there's a leakage. I call it a leakage, right? There is some piece of that outcome that is not yours, that is not aligned to you. And that's when you have that little voice inside of you, right? That little voice inside of you that's like, man, I could have done something different. Man, I could have done something better. I could have gone a different path. And that little voice is there, and it's there, and it's nagging. You silence it because you're focused on the fear. Okay, but that outcome that you deemed good enough has a little piece that was not good enough. And over time, as you're making these fear-based decisions, that little egg of not good enough gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, you get to the point where you become so deeply misaligned that you can't ignore the little voice anymore. You can't ignore the level of misalignment anymore. And that's when people pop. You know, people have, you just can't anymore. You get to the point where you just can't. You can't ignore the misalignment. You can't stop seeing that you're going in the wrong direction. And so the irony of the fear-based mindset is that everything that you deemed good enough and you avoided the bad outcome all came back on you. It all came back on you because it was never yours in the first place. You know, and I know that I've lived that in my life in full circle. You know, I was married once before Esther. I made choices about my academic career. I mean, I did okay, right? I have a PhD in it's not so bad, but I know in my heart that had I had the courage, the introspection, had I really sort of done a lot of the work that I've done now at a much younger age, I know that I would have chosen different paths. You know.
So what work have you done then? Because this is an interesting thing, because you're completely right. And I love the way you've articulated that. Again, I've got a vision in my head of like a plane that's just slowly going off course, just slightly by 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree, 1 degree. And before you know it, the plane I think there's an actual statistic about it. If a plane goes from LA to New York in a straight line, if it goes off by 1 degree, it'll end up in like Alaska or so, like the North Pole or something crazy like that, just by 1 degree. And then what you're then saying is you're so far away essentially from this true, authentic version of yourself, then it causes conflict. I just love that. I've got a really clear image in my head about that. How do we overcome this then? Because you sort of mentioned you've done work on yourself. So what does that look like? Because I feel like for us inherently as human beings, our default setting is to avoid fear, avoid things that could cause us harm because it could lead to us getting eaten by a tiger or starvation or all that sort of stuff. So for my two questions, my first one is this almost like an inherent trait we're trying to override and deprogram? And then second of all, what does it actually look like?
Okay, so for one, I mean, fear is natural, right? Fear is not a bad thing in so many ways, right? It's a natural human evolved response to real imminent danger. You know, you feel that prickle in the back of your neck for a reason. You know, it's telling you something. So the fear itself is not a bad thing. The thing is, though, that in these situations, these are human, these are emotional, these are psychological, you know, and so it's a different kind of fear. So, you know, one thing is creating that safe space. There's a big part of creating that safe space, and that's really where, like, my words of appreciation for you at the beginning of the show here really come from that. You know, that this really is a kind of movement towards more generally creating a safe space, in a place where it's okay for people, for men, to talk about these things, and that is huge. But the other part, though, and so much of the work that I've had to do, and so many of our clients have had to do, is really focusing on the idea of purpose. Mm-hmm. You know, that you're told that you need to sort of stay down, keep in this box, keep your head down, work hard, and then what you want, what your loves are, what your passion, your internal desires are, and what those are, take second place. And a big part of doing this work is shifting that narrative and shifting that mindset. So the purpose piece is huge. The purpose piece is huge. You know, you can't be a world traveler without loving language to some extent. And mm-hmm. I'm a huge word nerd. I love languages. In English, purpose, the word purpose, the root of the word purpose, comes down to an older Latin word that means your intention. Mm-hmm. Right? So your purpose is your intention. There's nothing too special about English necessarily. In Hindi, for example, the word that translates as purpose is pronounced uddesha, and uddesha means ud means up or higher, and desha means a place or country. So your purpose is your higher place, and I love that. Right? That you need to get in touch with that higher place that is still part of you, right? And so that alignment to your purpose is huge, and it's really, for me, was one of the biggest pieces for combating that fear, right? Because you realize in the fear that you're so embroiled in yourself, and there's something so powerful about seeing yourself on almost a different, almost spiritual plane, that you are part of something bigger than you also, and looking down at yourself from a different perspective, and being able to see, wow, I have a role in all of this. I have energy to devote. I have talents to devote to so much of this. And so the finding of your purpose is enormous. You know.
So just to clarify this, by the way, I love words. And that, for me to actually say that out loud, is a big thing, because really struggled at school with dyslexia, didn't like words at all. But the more I've gone down this journey of self-development, spirituality, whatever it is, it's really, as you said, dissecting the root of words. And again, for me, the stuff in the Hebrew language as well, when you look at certain stuff, when it's kind of broken down, what it actually means, it's absolutely fascinating when you look at what these words mean, these big words. And for you then say purpose, like, actually, it's your higher place. I'm like, wow, like straight away, that completely changed it. For me, purpose, everyone says, well, what's your purpose? And I was actually going to say to you, what does purpose mean? Because it means a lot of things to different people. But to actually then go back to its actual definition, intention, to become your higher self. Perfect. I couldn't have could sum it up any better. Now, I just want to sort of touch on something you said there. I think the fear-based stuff, this is my understanding of this, correct me if I'm wrong, is that when we are trying to look for things externally, so we're using the external outer world for validation of our existence. And it's that sort of, do I fit in this place, that causes that fear. Whereas kind of what you're saying here is that when you use purpose, you're kind of ignoring the external, you're going internally, figuring yourself out, so that then you don't need to worry about the external things in the world, because you internally have got yourself into a place to deal with that. Is that correct?
That's exactly, I mean, I think that's exactly right. There's so much, I mean, really, alignment is making your internal match with your external, right? When you are absorbing the external, which is not yours, into your internal, that's when you're going to go off course in so many ways. And I've, I heard, I think it must have been your most recent show with Kara Payton.
Payton, yes.
Yeah, she spoke a lot about that, right? That the importance of all of that coming from inside of you, right? And anything that's coming from the outside is not necessarily going to give you that alignment. And I think it's a really powerful perspective, that really you need to be the wellspring of that, and it needs to come from you.
I think there's a lot of people become, again, disempowered, is that everything's got to be external. And again, also from really, again, spirituality, whatever you want to talk about, it all talks about how it comes from within. Again, I'm not a religious person, but again, in the Bible, it says the same sort of thing, like find the kingdom of heaven within yourself. All this sort of stuff is like, it kind of tells you like it's here within us. Right. I feel like modern day society is, oh no, you need this thing to be validated. No, you need this car, you need this job, you need this amount of money, you need the house. Again, it's kind of like what Esther was saying, like you need all of these things. And only then will we actually accept you as you. But then the problem is, if you're not being you, you're wearing a mask, then people are like, yeah, but if they knew the real me, then they wouldn't accept me. So that then caused that fear, isn't it? If only people knew the real me.
I mean, and so much of that fear concept, at the end of the day, the result of that ends up being a lack of authenticity, right? You're not being authentic anymore. There's another good word. Authenticity comes from the Greek. Authenticity means to be master of oneself. Oh. Right? If you are not being authentic, you have not mastered yourself in so many ways, right? So much of this, doing that work to combat the fear, to get to the purpose, to find your higher place, so much of it comes down to it being about you mastering yourself.
And how do we do that? By the way, that Mikey's face then when you said that definition, that is a beautiful definition. That
isn't it? It's amazing. Yeah.
Again, very impactful. About a definition being empowering. That is fantastic. So then how do we go about this then? Because again, a lot of people will listen to this and they're like, yeah, I get this. Paul, Daniel, I get this. You're talking sense to me. How do we go about finding this purpose, intention, this mastering ourselves? Because again, this is where I think people get stuck. They want to do better. They know they can do better, but it's almost like paralysis by analysis. There's so much stuff out there. How do we go about just actually starting to figure ourselves out?
I mean, it's huge, right? People get stuck in that whole thing, the perfectionism. I don't want to get started because I'm going to do it wrong. The people pleasing, the overthinking, and people just get stuck in that, right? So at least the way that we do it, the way that I know that I walked through it, the way that so many of our clients have gone through it is sort of this larger three-step process. One is, here's the thing, it's more than just purpose, right? Because there were some things from that Kara said that I didn't exactly jive with, but one of the things that I did was this idea that it can't be just this beautiful idea. There has to be a plan behind, right? So one part is finding your purpose, and purpose is your compass. We talk about it as you have to have your own, we call it your GPS, right? One is your compass, and your compass is your purpose. It's your North Star, right? It's what's showing you where your internal wants to go. And that's a big process in and of itself, right? There's so much that's involved there between understanding what you want to be your ultimate legacy, what you want, what childhood experiences you've had, who your heroes were. And this was a huge one for me. This is an interesting aside. I was asked so many times about, my childhood and who was my hero and what did I want to be? And I spent months and months not having a good answer. I didn't have a good answer. And I know that a lot of it was, I mean, if you can't tell, I'm sort of the rebel in my family. I'm not the one who kept their head down. I'm not the one who stayed quiet, and I've done very different things. And so I never felt like I super belonged in my family necessarily. And so it was hard for me to pick out who were my childhood heroes and all this. And so after a lot of questioning, Esther finally said, well, what about like TV? What did you like? What was your TV? What did you like to watch on TV when you were a kid? And all of a sudden I had this like massive mental explosion. When I was a kid, every Saturday night, my family and I would sit together and we would watch the Jacques Cousteau show. I don't know how familiar any of your listeners are. So Jacques Cousteau is actually basically the inventor of scuba. So he was French. He was a huge in exploring the underwater world. and in the 60s and 70s. And so he had a TV show called, I think it was called The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. And it was gorgeous, right? Because it was on their ship called the Calypso, and they would tour the world, and they would go diving and find these amazing things. And then I realized that what I loved about him was that he had this amazing, competent calm. Like sometimes, you know, you're in the ocean, you're at the bottom of, and things go wrong. And this guy like knew what to do, and he was calm and he was comfortable. And he talked about the science, and he used such beautiful words to describe what he saw. And then he would go on shore and he would meet the people. And I realized, like, holy crap, like this is where I got my first, you know, I was 6, 7 years old at the time. This is where I got my first inkling that I wanted to travel. This is where I know that I got the desire to learn French. I lived in France for a couple of years, you know, and I learned to dive. And I know that in the back of my mind, it was because this was my childhood hero. You know, this was the person that I admired. So anyway, and all of those kinds of things come into your purpose, right? It's so much. It's, you know, you have to think about what are the things that you have overcome, and fear is some of them, systemic racism is some of them, some people, you know, depression, whatever it is, and then thinking about your toolkit, right? So your purpose is this much larger thing. You know, it's something that it's a whole process in itself that you go through and discover. Okay, and so that's great. That's your compass, right? Second piece of that, though, is the roadmap. It's the second part of your GPS. After your compass comes your roadmap, because having just the knowledge of what your purpose is without intentionally setting how you're going to go about moving forward on your purpose is just going to languish, right? So that is huge. That roadmap piece is tremendous. The plan of action. And the mistake that so many people make is that they want to jump into the roadmap without knowing the purpose, right? We see so many people who come to us and say, so part of the roadmap is getting yourself organized, getting your time organized, making use of your time, making sure that in your day-to-day work, that there's a piece of it, even if the job itself is not necessarily aligned to your purpose, that there's a piece of it that's pushing it. And that applies in your personal space too, you know, making that time intentionally. So there's a lot of people who jump in directly into that. I just need to fix my calendar. I need an app, you know, and we've seen so many times that the app is great. The calendar is great, but you got to know where it's going to take you.
It's that intention. It's that intention, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've literally just quickly had to load up some notes from another podcast I've listened to, and I got a definition of intention there, which is deciding what you're going to do with the waking hours of your life, so your sleeping hours are so much more peaceful.
No, that's gorgeous.
And I was just like, so I just wanted to get that in there on this podcast, because it's like when you sort of mention that, I love that. It's like, so you kind of know where you're going, but then it's like, right, how are we going to get there? But it's the intention that's moving you forward towards that. And as you sort of saying, it's like, you can have this app, you can have the calendar, you can have all this stuff, but it's the user behind it and what's your intention behind having these things. Because if you just think you're going to download an app and it's then going to drive you towards your goal, then you're delusional. And I feel like that, again, that goes back to that, oh, I just need this thing. I'll be successful once I have this thing. I'll earn money or run this business when I have this thing. It's like, well, no, you're still going to be you, how you are now, just with this new app. So it's like, no, you've got to change that intention. Like, and again, that intention comes down to like your thoughts. It's like, what are you thinking? Like, and so I just wanted to, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it's like, I just wanted to hit on that word intention, because it's, for me, it seems to be popping up everywhere at the moment. And I feel this universe giving me a sign that I just need to talk about it.
Here's the other thing though, like when people get super overwhelmed, the other piece of that, and part of the roadmap is also breaking it down into manageable pieces in a lot of ways. So much of what we see is also that people see their purpose, they see a huge gap between where they are now and where they want to be. And so they super aggressively say, I'm going to reach this, without thinking about all the steps that are there on the meantime. So people really, people underestimate how long it can take, and then people become impatient. So a lot of the roadmap work that we do is really making it realistic, really accounting for life. Like I know that in So, one of the being an economist is a really interesting thing, because economists pretend in a lot of ways that they're laboratory scientists and that they can isolate the world and, perform things in a vacuum. So an economist would say, all else equal, if I want to do just this one thing, it's going to take me 3 weeks. Right. But the reality is that not all else is equal. Life happens. World is dynamic. Right. So a lot of the work is thinking about, okay, this is the big thing I want to accomplish. It has all of these components that go with it. I need to separate these into time. Some of them will be simultaneous, but I need to break them down into small enough pieces that, one, I can realistically say how long it's going to take, and I can see my progress as I go along. And that's a big thing for us, that celebration of even the small wins. So we talk, when we see how people often don't stick with a program, that they don't stick with the pursuit of their purpose and implementing it, it's oftentimes because they're not seeing the wins soon enough. And so one of the big things that we make sure to do is to really break those down and identify the win points as you go along. And that's really part of your roadmap, right? These are your road signs that you're doing it, you're making progress, you're moving forward. It's not necessarily going to be lightning speed, but you're getting there. And honestly, those little celebrations of even those small wins really warm your heart, because you see that was a win towards your purpose, right? And that visualization, that internalization of the alignment, that I'm thinking this, I'm feeling this, and I'm doing this, is really huge. And when we talk about momentum and making sure that you don't stop, that is really, really big.
I say momentum is a huge thing. And I think, again, I like this. I do the exact same things. I've got this big thing that I'm doing at the minute. It's going to take me a long time to do. But I've chunked it down to smaller goals. And what I find myself is, some days I'm like, right, I'm just going to do this one thing. And what happens is, once I do that one thing, guess what? I'm now in the mood, momentum, headspace. That one thing becomes two, becomes three, becomes four. By the end of the day, I've easily done quite a few things, which again, wasn't intentional, but it's like I've actually got into headspace, but it just started with me doing, right, rather than saying I've got to this massive chunk, I'm just going to start by doing this. It's like when people say, oh, clean the house. Now, if that's a massive job for you, okay, just clean half of one room. Once you've done that, well, I'll finish that room. Oh, actually, okay, I'll do it. And it kind of like, it builds up and you get that confidence to do that. So I love that you've said that. One thing I just want to sort of touch on is, I think sometimes in this day and age, people can get lost too much in the celebration and then stop putting their foot on the gas. So how do you sort of combat that? They almost pat themselves on the back too soon and then stop putting the effort in. Do you find that is a thing at all, or do you sort of manage to nip that in the bud quite well?
I would say that most of the folks that we work with are really what we call high achievers. And the high achievers are really good at downplaying their accomplishments. So at least in the folks that we've seen, it's really almost been the opposite of that. It's really about pushing them like, hey, this was huge. This was a big accomplishment. Stop for a second, pause the hamster wheel, look at where you are now, look at where you started, and celebrate that, So
I'm the same. Like when it comes to podcasts and stuff like that, I find it very hard to be like, downplay it. But there's a phrase that comes to my mind. It's called a blissful dissatisfaction, where you sit in the bliss of, this is amazing. So you actually allow yourself the time to stop. You appreciate it, but then you're dissatisfied and then want more. So it's like when the analogy that was taught to me to explain that is like, you have a good piece of steak. Like you have that one bite, you then don't say, all right, I'm done. You have that one bite, you're like, wow, this was amazing. You enjoy that taste, and then you want more. So actually by stopping, appreciating that win, really acknowledging it, it then drives you to want more of that, because you're kind of playing on like the dopamine hit and all that sort of stuff that then sort of goes with it in that pursuit.
No, I love that. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the system. It's a big part of the system that you create to really make that incentive come forward and really sort of push towards that and have people keep moving on it. We've seen that like we get a lot of clients, for example, even clients that are no longer working with us, and that's a big thing for us is making sure that we graduate our clients. You know what I mean? I don't want to have somebody I don't want to have somebody who feels that they're dependent on me forever, but rather because that means I haven't done my job. You know what I
mean? We went about the Cara podcast. That's something she mentions there as well, about the industry of like so many people want to just keep their clients and hoard them. Whereas like, actually, no, like your clients should want to be with you because they enjoy it, not because they actually need you. So I love the fact you said that they graduated. So I don't interrupt you, but like the fact you actually made a point of graduating them. Yes, 100%.
Yeah, and you know, and one of the things that's really fun actually is that even post them working with us, they still like to check in with us on their celebrations, which is amazing, right? Because they, in some way, it's good for them because it's that acknowledgement of the celebration, but it's also a huge testimonial for us, right? That they are still doing the work, that they're still moving forward, and that they're still progressing, and that our impact lives on. Because at the end of the day, you know, when we I keep saying we, it's Esther and I and Be Act Change, our whole reason is really to impact lives, you know, and to see that impact moving forward in time is a huge win for us. And
it shows it works as well. Like I said, the fact that people have left you and they're carrying on doing it, it shows that it works. So you said there's 3 points. The first one covered was the purpose, which is the compass. The second one was the roadmap, which again is the intentions of making that move forward. What's the third one?
Number 3 is your toolkit. Number 3 is your toolkit. And we've mentioned a couple of times that life happens. You know, parents get sick, children get sick, financial things happen, and you cannot keep an invulnerable emotional state, right? We've talked about vulnerability. Sometimes you're going to have your ups and downs, and you have to be ready for the things that are going to buffet you about as time goes by. You know, and one of the big things of discovering your purpose is not only understanding what things you have overcome, but also what things helped you over time, right? And so really it's about a big part of our process is making sure that toolkit is integrated into the daily, okay, and into part of who you are. So for example, for me, growing up, as I said, I often felt a lack of belonging. I felt a differentness and otherness, and for me, the savior for me was books. You know, it was really something that opened my eyes to possibilities and perspectives. I was really into sort of sci-fi fantasy kind of things because I not because I believed it so much, but I loved that sort of mind-opening experience of there being people and places and creatures and things,
possibilities,
right? And so that was huge. And so in times where I felt down or felt the fear or doubted myself, in a strange way, that understanding that, man, there's so much out there, there's so many possibilities, that why am I drowning in this one thing, you know? And the same for me is travel. Travel for me is enormous. I know that we travel way more than the average person, but a big piece of that is for me that reconnection, that grounding again, that is so strong for my own resilience, you know, for my own ability to weather whatever else is coming at me. The experiences that I have when I travel overseas is gold to me, because that's what really keeps my headspace in the right place. And it's going to be different for each person, you know?
Yeah. Can I just ask a question? Are you spiritual, religious? What's your, the only reason why I ask that is because of all the stuff you're saying about connecting and traveling and filling your cup up, I'm just very curious on what your sort of belief system is.
You know, it's Latino, you grow up Catholic. I made it through 6 years of Catholic school in primary. And when it came time to do my confirmation, I lasted 1 day and I asked too many questions and I was not invited back. So I would say that in some ways, I'm a recovering Catholic, but I also, I would definitely say that I am a spiritual person. Like, I really believe in the ideas of energy and connection, and that there's something that connects us all, not just as people, but as living things, that we have a duty to each other and to the world. But I wouldn't say that it's connected to any particular dogma or practice.
No, I'm exactly the same. The reason why I asked that is because you're so well traveled and you've seen so many people and you have connected with so many people. I was just very curious at where you sort of stand on it. I'm exactly the same. I believe in a universal energy that connects us all. That's my belief. I don't attach it to anything. It's just this thing that connects us all. And again, you can feel people's energy when you go into a room. I was just very curious because I said, you're so well traveled. And I just popped into my head, like, I wonder what this gentleman believes. I wonder
really
what his is.
I'll tell you what, it's really interesting because, you know, I'm brown enough that if I go to Morocco, I look Moroccan. If I go to Greece, I look Greek. There's places I can go to places in India or Pakistan where I look like them. And so almost anywhere I go in sort of those regions of the world, I can walk down the street and I'm treated very much as a local. And even though I don't necessarily know the ins and outs of, for example, of being Muslim or being Jewish or, you know, or any other non-Christian type religion, I find that I always am able to integrate well into those places and conversations, strictly really based on that perspective of I'm here to understand you, to accept you, to learn from you. And really honestly, as long as you have that perspective, the fact that that person is Muslim or this person is Christian and all of that, at the end of the day, I have found in the day-to-day to matter very little. You become a person, you become a human, you humanize them, they humanize you, and it's something that is very mutually self-enriching. And as I say, that's one of the things that fills me up. You know, that's what I love about travel.
I think you've hit on something really important there. I think it comes down to the intention as well. What's your intention behind having these conversations? What's your intention of talking? Because again, like I said, when I went to Barbados, the gentleman there, black gentleman, taxi driver, we were literally chatting like best mates. And there's another taxi driver, one night, chatting like best mates. But again, we were literally just chatting as two human beings. And our intentions were, oh, we're not from the same country. You've had experiences, I've had experiences. Let's have a conversation. And I think it's, again, the intention is such a powerful thing. Like, what is your intention when you're going to these countries, when you're interacting with people, even in your own country? What is your intention? If your intention is to, I'm going to belittle this person or I'm better than this person, it gives off a completely different energy. Whereas actually, if you're open to learning new things, understanding that this person is the same as me, we're all human beings experiencing this, whatever this is right now, it just puts everyone on a level playing field. And then means when you have these conversations, even if they're difficult conversations, actually kind of puts you on a sort of level playing field. And I actually don't think about this. I think this is why I have such success when I go into schools talking with some of the troubled kids, because I don't see them as a troubled kid. I see them as a young human being. And I just go in there, and my intention is, how can I help? I don't say that, but that's my energy when I go in there. And I feel like kids especially can pick up on that energy and what you're kind of putting out. Am I hitting on something there, or is that just me going a bit crazy?
I mean, the one thing is that you can definitely, one of the things we've learned, I was a teacher for a long time, I was a professor for a long time. One of the things that I've learned is that you cannot ever underestimate children. Mm-hmm. Children they're small, but their brains are very, very good. They have a very tremendous capacity for thinking and feeling and expressing. We've actually done some of these purpose exercises with really young children and come out with just phenomenal insights, you know. And it's really important to meet them at that level, right? Not in a condescending, paternalistic kind of a way, but really there to be for them to understand that you hear them, you see them, and that you're there as not just a guide, but a support system. And, you know, again, opening possibilities to them. You know, I've had the good fortune to work with children with kids, teenagers who've, you know, been in troubled situations and I think it's important to say that, because they're not a troublemaker. They are not necessarily troubled teens, and it's really about their situation. Mm-hmm. And so much of it comes down to what are the opportunities that you can bring to them, and how it is that you can elevate them. And so much of that comes down to changing their own mentality. You know, we lived, one of our diplomatic tours was in the Caribbean. And one of the fascinating things about the Caribbean islands, and it's several of them, you know, it's Trinidad, it's Jamaica, and different places, they are very heavily maternalistic societies. And so it creates a very, very, in a lot of ways, from a cultural perspective, a version of masculinity that is very extreme. And so the behaviors that go along with that, when some of those young men don't have the opportunities and possibilities, become very negative. And so much of the work that we did in the international development sphere in those places was really about talking to the young men. When we talked about gender work, in so many parts of the world, gender work means really working on women and girls and their rights and that sort of thing. But in large parts of the Caribbean, it comes down to working with young men. And it's really about, one, teaching them empathy and showing them, you know, how it is that they are connected to other people and how their actions and their words and their feelings impact other people. And then so much of it is also really, really about understanding them and seeing them and connecting with them as people, because they've been isolated in so many ways, and they've been assigned a kind of role in society that they didn't know how to break out of, you know. So it's tremendous.
I would love to go full circle here. To a comment that you mentioned in the introduction about two men, masculine men, talking about stuff. What is masculinity? I didn't know we were going to go on this topic really, but I'd just like to know what your definition of the word masculinity is, because I feel, again, this is massively stereotyping. But when I go into these inner city schools in the UK, I go and do big year assemblies, and then they give me like a small group of 15 to 20 students that are the ones that are troubled kids, the struggling kids, whatever these labels want to give them. And again, massive generalization, but the vast majority of the time, they are from single parent households. It's mainly the women, the mums that's raising them. So the mum's having to play the mother role, the father role, and they've got such a poor relationship with the men in their life, and also then the women teachers. There's no respect, and I feel it's because they're lacking a strong male role model. So again, a lot of people will listen to this podcast that from schools I've been into, but I'm just very genuinely curious. What do you think it means to be masculine? And from a young age, if, for example, and this is a bit of a loaded question, if there's a woman listening to this, there's a single parent that is raising a young boy, how can we try and instill masculine values without there being a strong male role model?
Okay. So I think that so much of the traditional role of masculinity, the traditional perception of masculinity, I've tried to think about, you know, what's like, if I had to encapsulate it in one word, that so much of it is that men have to be reliable. That you have to be there, you have to show up, and you cannot, and part of being reliable is being not vulnerable. So a lot of it to me comes down to this vulnerability piece. So a lot of the discussions that I have, and I agree with you that I've had these discussions also with women and single moms, is really creating the space for the men and the boys to be vulnerable, allowing that. And so in so many ways, like, you know, language is, words are words, and we can do with them what they want, right? So like the concept of vulnerability traditionally is seen so much as a weakness. It's your vulnerability, it's your weakness, and it's what's going to bring you down. As we have gone through these kinds of conversations and through these different sort of mind shifts, well, the way that we use the word vulnerable has changed. So we say, we're like, you see somebody being open and somebody being emotional and that sort of thing, and you look at that person and you say, wow, that person was so vulnerable. And that vulnerability, it's part of it is changing that concept of vulnerability into strength, right? I'm so strong, I'm such a man, I'm so masculine that I am willing to show my vulnerability to you. And to me, that's a huge part of changing how it is that we see masculinity, right? That the masculine isn't the invulnerable. The masculine is the strength to actually be open in that way, you know. And so much of that comes in different ways, you know. Like for me, anybody who knows me knows that my greatest love is babies. I love babies. Esther's over here laughing at me as I say that, because it's true. I love babies. You know, there's something about a new person and the possibility that comes with that and all of that just fills my soul, you know. And I love babies. It's not a particularly traditionally masculine thing to do, but I love it, you know. I love food. I'm the primary cook in our family. And so that willingness of and desire really on my part to take on those traditionally non-masculine roles is really important, you know. Like role modeling doesn't have to be something that's in your face, you know. It's you being authentic and you know, doing the things that you love. And those are the things I love, you know. I love babies and cooking, you know. It's bringing those things to the world and showing them, you know, And I think that that really allowing that vulnerability piece. The other piece of that is also the communication.
Yep.
I think we're really taught to bottle things in, because showing that emotional piece is vulnerable, and vulnerable is seen as weak, right? And I think that we really need to change that so much. You know, we need to create spaces where men are able to talk and share, and that space has to start at home.
Yep.
You know, I've seen that. I see that in my own family. You know, it's not something that I've been able to create in the family that I grew up with. But it's something that we very much create in our household with our children. You know, mm-hmm. It's one of those things that generationally it was something that was passed on, and we made the very conscious decision that stops with us. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. we're not gonna impose that on our kids, on our son, and we're going to allow him to express himself as he sees fit, and value what he brings to any conversation. You know,
I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that about the vulnerability piece, because again, I think that's one of the ways that, again, I impact so many people when I talk, is because I start off by sharing my story. So again, right. Very big masculine man, got typical masculine man tattoos on my arm, and I then talk about how I hit rock bottom and my struggle with depression. And I was doing a talk recently in front of a group of tradesmen, so builders, plumbers, all that sort of stuff. And again, middle-aged men, so like 40s, 50s, very closed to mental health mindset. And this gentleman was basically saying that mental health was all mamby-pamby, and he says it makes you weak. To show you vulnerability makes you weak. And I says, okay, well, what do you think of me then? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, I've just shared my story. What do you think of me? And he went, yeah, well, I think you're all right. And I went, that's interesting, because you didn't know me before we stepped in. So it says, right. Actually, you don't think I'm a pussy. You don't think I'm this. You don't think I'm that. You've actually said, actually, I'm all right. And looking at you, saying someone's all right, it's probably a bit of a compliment. So it says, so tell me again about how actually being vulnerable makes you weak. And again, he just didn't have a response to it. And I think for me, it's that vulnerability of when you know yourself that much that you can step into a situation and own it. That's then that real strength. It's like that movie 8 Mile with Eminem at the end, when he gets that the rap battle, and he basically says, exactly. Yes, I'm this, yes, I'm that, yes, 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 and passes the mic. I'm like, now what? That for me is that real strength of, I know my weaknesses, I know what I am, but actually, if you come and try and stamp on me, I'll show you this warrior side of me as well. It's having that you can be the gardener, you can be the peaceful gardener that knows himself and can be vulnerable. But actually, if you try and step on my family, I can step up as well. It's having that both. I think a lot of young men are so stuck on this. No, I've got to be a warrior. I've got to be hard. I've got to be this. They miss all the benefits of, no, but enjoy the garden, enjoy life's journey, like explore yourself, like get to know yourself, because like you're with yourself every day, like just become your own best mate. And it's like they miss that massive key part that kind of brings it all together.
I mean, and you know, that's one of the things that we haven't talked about in terms of vulnerability. We talked about sort of vulnerability means you want to stay here, you got to keep your guard and that sort of thing. And we do that out of the fear of sort of hitting that rock bottom. But the boundary is also on the top, right? When you make yourself invulnerable, you also close yourself off to the that catalyst for change. You know, you've really limited yourself in so many ways. And so that willingness to be vulnerable, to be open, to be authentic is something that I think really can propel you forward in terms of your own peace, your own joy, your own fulfillment. I think it's a huge key to that puzzle, you know?
I had no idea we were going to go down that path, Paul, but I'm really glad that we did. Just to sort of wrap this up, because I'm very cautious of your time. One question I like to ask all my guests.
Yeah.
What advice would you give people right now who are feeling lost and out of control with their life? We've covered a lot of stuff, but if you could either summarize it or put another sort of thing on it, like a stamp on it, what advice would you give to someone?
I mean, a couple of things, you know. One is so much like for one, I'm here talking to you, I'm looking you in the eye, and to tell those people, I see you and I hear you, and you're not alone. You know, when you're in that rock bottom place, when you're lost, it's so easy to close in on yourself and think, man, no one has ever felt this way. And I guarantee you we have. You know, I've been there. So many people have been there. And so it's really important for you to know that you're not alone in this. And the second piece that goes with that then is then you need to take some action. And part of the action is, one, finding your champions. You know, you have champions. the other thing that I would tell people who are feeling that way is that you make a difference in the world. It might not be, and we see this all the time when we do these purpose exercises, that people are afraid to do their purpose exercise in a lot of ways because they're afraid that they're going to see that their whole life has been a mistake. Like, shit, I don't even want to know, But the truth is that little voice inside of you that we talked about is always pushing you a little bit. And there's always a piece of your purpose in your life. You can't silence it forever. And the truth is that is the value that you bring to people. Mm-hmm. And so when you're at that bottom, the second part is to really understand that you have value and that you contribute value and that you are important in this world, right? You are part of that higher place. You know what I mean? You have a role in that higher place, and to recognize that, and then to seek out the champions, to seek out the people in your circle, and even find new circles. We talk about that a lot as well, that the importance of if the people around you are not the ones that are uplifting you, find those people. Yeah. And there's a difference between those that go, good on you, well done, and those who are going to be there for you when you hit the rock bottom. Mm-hmm. And identify those people, find them, talk to them, ask them, why am I your friend? Mm-hmm. And that's really, really big, because so much of that question, that friendship is assumed, right? The people who are really your champions, you don't often talk about it, and we really should ask that question. Why are you my friend? Mm-hmm. And you're gonna, I guarantee you, if the person's really your champion, they will tell you some way in which you have impacted them, even if it was a moment, like this is the moment that I knew that you were my friend. Mm-hmm. And you oftentimes didn't even realize how it is that you had an impact on that person. And so for me, that when you're in that rock bottom place, the first piece of being able to recover, start on a new path, is really understanding that as much as you feel that you are on the bottom, that you feel on the bottom because there are people who are holding you up still, And yeah. So that piece is really, really big. And understanding that having those champions help you understand that you provide value, that you provide worth, that you are worthy of that friendship and that connection.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Like I said, I've never even thought about doing that. I might ask Mikey after the podcast why Mikey's my friend.
I really think you should. It's a really transformational kind of a thing. That people who are like, especially in this purpose exercise, people are like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what my purpose is. You often ask people and they tell you the description of their job as their purpose. Yes, and I'm like, man, that's not it. Yeah. And so we ask people to do this, take your 5 closest champions and ask them, and they come back. And then what's so fascinating is that so often what people identified as part of the purpose exercise as their strength, or the change that they want to see in the world. And that's one of the questions we ask, what change would you want to see in the world? So much of that, when the answers from their champions come back, you see that alignment, right? That what they are naturally bringing to those around them is the change that they want to see in the world, and that is like, wow, like mind blowing. And that's so important, right? To realize that, to feel that you're at the bottom, to feel that you're not advancing in your purpose or anything like that. And then to see that, holy crap, I actually have been doing this in my own way.
So what you're saying is, just because again, I love that. This is why I love doing my job. I love my job, and I love these podcasts. So what you're saying is, the change you want to see in the world, and that could be X. Then if you then ask your friends, why are you friends? What you'll find is that, do you know what I mean? If you kind of like take a summary of it all, it will kind of nicely line up with actually what you want to see the change in the world is. Is that what you're saying? There's like a correlation with that.
So I'll give you my example. My example is that when I've done this purpose exercise, the change that I want to see in the world is for people who I identify as an outsider in my family, right? I've said it a couple of times. I've often struggled with that sense of belonging. And that's something that I know that I've always looked for in my relationships and in my jobs, even that sense of belonging. And so a big part of the change that I would want to see in the world is for people to create the ways and the mechanisms for people who feel that they don't belong to see how it is that they integrate and how it is that they that they contribute value and how they are part of this sort of larger humanity, right? And so when I've done that exercise with my friends, with my champions, and asked them, the result that comes back is that they say, Paul, you are the one who always accepts us. You're the one who always finds the best in us, even when we don't see it ourselves, and things like that, right? And you're like, crap, that's what I've been doing.
This is it, yeah.
I've been doing, you know, and it's magical. It's really powerful.
No, honestly, I have truly enjoyed this podcast. Like I said, I love your energy. I love your energy after we spoke of the Esther podcast, and I knew you can add some real value to my audience. Final thing, where can people find out more information about you? If people want to connect and reach out, where can they find out about you?
So several things. I'm on LinkedIn. You look me up, Dr. Paul Rivera on LinkedIn. We also have on Instagram, we have our b.act.change, b.act.change on Instagram. We have bactchange.com. All those are places where you can find us. Just a quick plug for Esther's book called Creating Your Limitless Life. If you haven't gotten it yet, I highly recommend that you do. It's a really great book. And we've talked a little bit about it, but it's creating your limitless life with chasing the American dream crossed out, right? And so that idea is basically creating your own dream and creating the mechanisms for you to live it out.
And again, I've got my copy of the book right here. So again, on the camera straight away, you can see that it's all there. So again, make sure you go check that out. There'll be a link for the book in the description as well. So make sure you go and check that out. Paul, thank you very much for your time today. It's been incredible talking to you. Like I said, you've added some real value. And again, we spoke about topics I had no idea we were going to talk about, but it's been very, very refreshing. So thank you very much.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.